I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily News for Thursday, February 10th. Tonight, we have multiple updates on anti-COVID mandate border protests. And we start in Manitoba, where the RCMP say a protest has shut down the province's main border crossing with the United States. Mounties say a large number of vehicles and farm equipment is blocking the Emerson port of entry, which is located about 100 kilometers south of Winnipeg. They say no traffic is getting through in either direction, and people should avoid the area. A protest over COVID-19 public health measures also continues outside the Manitoba legislature in Winnipeg. Meanwhile, RCMP Superintendent Roberta McHale says the protest site at Alberta's U.S. border crossing at Coutts is unsafe and cannot continue. Mounties tried yesterday to get anti-vaccine mandate protesters to stop blocking traffic and move to another location. But they were quickly and angrily rebuffed. Dozens of truck drivers and supporters on a highway north of Coutts and near the town of Milk River say they aren't going anywhere. They warn that there's going to be more coming. A similar protest against COVID-19 measures is preventing Canada-bound traffic from crossing the Ambassador Bridge for yet another day. The protest has mostly shut down traffic at the Ambassador Bridge between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit. It is forcing automakers to shut down plants and send workers home. Ford Canada, Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada, and Stellantis all report their operations have been impacted by the blockade. The Ambassador Bridge is the busiest crossing in North America. It typically handles about 7,000 commercial vehicles a day, carrying goods traded between Canada and the United States. Well, this comes as the Conservatives are calling on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to table a plan to lift all federal COVID-19 related mandates and restrictions. They say that after 2 years, Canadians just want their lives back. Interim party leader Candice Bergen is also calling on protesters to leave border crossings for the sake of the economy. Separately, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is calling on the Prime Minister to show leadership and bring the anti-vaccine mandate demonstrations to an end. Turning to Nova Scotia now, where the provincial government is moving to gradually lift COVID-19 restrictions in a 3-step plan. Premier Tim Houston says under Phase 1, which kicks in Monday, the informal gathering limit will rise from 10 to 25 people. Meanwhile, limits for events such as weddings, funerals, and faith services will increase to 50% of capacity indoors and outdoors. Retail businesses and malls can operate at full capacity, and restaurants and bars at 75% capacity. Meanwhile, a new Leger poll finds 43% of Canadians surveyed don't want governments to lift restrictions too quickly. But 29% say it's time to lift pandemic restrictions and learn to live with the virus. They point out they are adequately vaccinated and consider the Omicron variant to be less serious. The other 28% of replies were evenly split among those feeling anxious about reopening measures and those who were angry and say they want governments to give them back their freedom. Albertans were the most opposed to mandates, while people in Atlantic Canada were most anxious about lifting restrictions. All right, moving to Canada's meat industry now, which has been dealt another blow as South Korea and the Philippines have put restrictions on Canadian poultry products. This after avian influenza was detected in a commercial poultry flock in Nova Scotia. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says the outbreak was reported to the World Organization for Animal Health last week. The U.S., European Union, Taiwan, Mexico, Japan, Hong Kong, and Russia are also banning some products from Nova Scotia. Time for a look at the FIFA World Rankings, where the Canadian men continue their record rise up, climbing 7 spots to another all-time high at number 33. Canada was named the most improved side in 2021 by FIFA, and it has now risen 39 places since the end of 2020. This was sparked by an unbeaten run in CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. John Herdman's side tops the ongoing final round of World Cup qualifying in CONCACAF, which covers North and Central America and the Caribbean. At 7-0-4, the Canadians are on the verge of qualifying for Qatar 2022. And Team Canada athletes picked up 4 more medals at the Beijing Olympics today. 26-year-old speed skater Isabelle Weideman from Ottawa picked up her second medal of the Games, a silver in the women's 5,000 meters. The mixed aerials team captured the bronze medal. Elliot Grondin took the silver in men's snowboard cross, and Jack Crawford won the bronze medal in the men's alpine combined event. Stay with us. We'll be back after the break with a look at the Super Bowl and the markets. An interview with Brendan Caldwell up next. The Super Bowl is set to begin on Sunday, with football and entertainment fans ready to enjoy another spectacular show. And if you're an investor, you might want to pay close attention as well. That is, if you believe in the Super Bowl indicator, which is said to suggest that stocks can rise and fall depending on which team wins. Market strategists have found the S&P 500 has performed better when National Football Conference teams win. But can the market really be manipulated by the outcome of sports games? Well, joining us now to give us more insight into what exactly a Super Bowl indicator is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you very, very much, Nima. Good to be here. I'm at Earl's Sports Bar at King University enjoying my Diet Coke.
Very fitting to the theme. So, Brendan, what exactly is a Super Bowl indicator and how accurate is it?
The theory was, as you articulated, that if the NFC, the National Football Conference, wins, then the stock market will go up the next year. Now, the theory was started in 1978, and it had been an absolutely perfect indicator if you consider the Pittsburgh Steelers to be an NFC team because they were part of the original NFL. So you got to hedge a bit. But in the last number of years, hasn't been a good indicator at all. In fact, go back to the 2008 Super Bowl, things got really, really ugly after that for the markets, even though the New York Giants and NFC team actually won the game.
Well, taking that into consideration, how much of an impact does something like the Super Bowl have on the markets, and does it have the same impact on all stocks?
Well, no and yes. You see, the interesting thing from an analyst point of view is that you can get all kinds of things that you think have a causation of the market simply because there's correlation. You know, markets have gone up always because of this or that or the other. There's in an election year, if the Republicans win, the market's supposed to go up, but not if the Democrats. Different things like that. So, but correlation and causation aren't the same thing. It does seem, though, that the companies that advertise in the Super Bowl tend to do a little bit better than others. We'll see.
All right. So, Brendan, what team should investors root for? One from the NFC or the AFC?
Well, they absolutely this year should be rooting for the LA Rams. So I've dressed as far as I could in Rams colors, the gold and the blue. But the other team is the Cincinnati Bengals. Both have a claim to underdog status. Never have two teams seated so lowly in the standings actually been the ones to do battle in the Super Bowl. So if you want to root for the Bengals, who spent 20 years being known as the Bungles, then I can understand your point of view. But from a stock market perspective, LA Rams all the way.
And you mentioned earlier about advertisers. We know the Super Bowl is super famous for its advertisements. So what kind of impact do ads have on the stock market?
Well, I don't know about the stock market, but in Canada, it makes us a little nostalgic or wistful that we can't get the American ads up here. So only in America, pity. But at least in the short term, it does tend to give a boost to the companies that advertise in the Super Bowl. What's interesting this year is it's expected that a lot of crypto type companies, Coinbase, CoinSquare, these different companies are going to be advertising on the Super Bowl. The last time we had a big technology push on the Super Bowl was 2000s when all the .com companies were advertising. So I think in the very short term, the next week or two, you may see an outperformance of these companies. Over the next year, it might be an indicator that these particular sector has topped out. At least for the next year.
All right, Brendan, and what about after the Super Bowl? What happens to the stocks after such a huge event?
Well, again, correlation and causation. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything particularly is going to happen. But I think investors, as a general rule, shouldn't feel that just because of a particular thing like sell in May and go away, or there's always a January rally, or this always happens, or that always happens. It doesn't, especially when you say it out loud. As soon as a trend is articulated, it means that probably everybody's already jumped on it, and whatever happened in the past won't happen in the future. But I think the thing to watch is it costs so much money to put a Super Bowl ad on. I think $7 million this year, that anybody spending that kind of money, maybe hubris is set in, and it might be a tough year for those companies. So that's my only short-term, medium-term prediction.
All right, lots to keep our eyes out for. Brendan, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima. Go Rams.
Cheers. All right, we'll be back after the break with a look at the opioid crisis in BC. We'll have an interview with Dr. Ramneek Dosanjh, the president of Doctors of BC, up next. That and, of course, more news from around the world. So stay tuned. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. British Columbia's provincial health officer says the COVID-19 pandemic and the toxic drug crisis are intertwined. Dr. Bonnie Henry made the comment yesterday after the BC Coroner Service released figures showing 2021 was the deadliest year on record for suspected overdoses, with more than 2,200 recorded. Dr. Henry says getting through the next phase of the pandemic is vital to helping people caught in the opioid crisis. Well, joining us now to give us a deeper look into BC's opioid crisis is Dr. Ramneek Dosanjh, president of Doctors of BC. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me on your show today.
So how has the opioid crisis evolved and intertwined with the pandemic, as Dr. Henry is saying?
We've known since 2016 that BC declared a public health emergency in response to this ongoing crisis of illicit drugs-related toxicity and the overdose deaths. The numbers, as you know, have only worsened during the pandemic, and this is a crisis of epic proportions. While deaths have happened across the socioeconomic spectrum, there's been a disproportionate impact on young males.
And do you think the attention on the pandemic may have overshadowed the opioid crisis in BC?
I do believe it's been a tricky situation to navigate. As you can attest, the media coverage has been pandemic and COVID focused around the globe as of late. I do feel that for us on the ground, these simultaneous crises have affected our work life the same in a way, and only exacerbated the way that we're able to respond and provide for this magnitude of crisis.
So what are BC doctors and yourself recommending in order to tackle this growing epidemic, doctor?
We know that the burden of the COVID pandemic has put immense pressure on an already constrained system. We've had increasing inequities, intermittent resources, burnout on the front line, as well as a deep sense of loss of connection and belonging. And we know that addiction is a multifaceted approach. We need to work on prevention, harm reduction, and urgent intervention.
It's really interesting that you mention the burnout among doctors and healthcare workers. We've been seeing this across the country. So tell us a little bit more about how this has impacted services for the opioid crisis in particular, doctor.
Well, if you think about how about access to hospitals and urgent care and our frontline workers, staff, healthcare workers, our emergency first responders, everyone has been overwhelmed with the response through COVID. And the opioid crisis, the 911 calls, and the urgent nature of immediate availability has only been exacerbated by COVID plugging up the hospitalization rate and access to care.
And are there any other factors that may have led to 2021 being the deadliest year on record for opioid deaths, doctor?
I think this is absolutely correct. I believe that the access to healthcare and resources and all of the things that are concerning to the social determinants of health that impact all of our public safety and health have been constrained. And we have been under so much duress from the front lines to our government working very hard to try to correct this.
So what's at risk here, Dr. Dosanjh, if nothing is done to improve the opioid crisis here?
I think this is unacceptable. I feel that the way that we have gone, we need to act now. We need to get involved and try to implement strategies across our healthcare sector, involve as many people, including these patients and their families. It's devastating to watch this happen and not have an urgent crisis response. I believe that everyone has been trying their best in a collaborative effort, but we must act now.
Devastating to watch indeed, Doctor. About a minute left here, but what resources are currently available for BC residents that may be facing addiction right now?
So there's multiple avenues in which people can access care. And what I've alluded to are the harm reduction techniques. And we are having safe prescribing and safer supply networks that have been established and been effective in this crisis. We need to increase and bolster the infrastructure and support across the sector in terms of having people to have access to safe addiction care. Also, the understanding we need to destigmatize how addiction is looked at in our public interface. We also need to provide more counseling support and more access to things that can improve the social determinants of health.
Dr. Dosanjh, thank you again for this inside look at BC's opioid crisis.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Stay tuned. We'll be back after the break with news from around the world. Russia says the West needs to stop lecturing. U.S. inflation soars to a 40-year high, and Africa is moving into the control phase of the pandemic. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world when we come back from break, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has told Britain's top diplomat that, quote, ideological approaches, ultimatums, and moralizing is a road to nowhere. Mr. Lavrov told UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss in Moscow that Russia won't accept Western lecturing. Ms. Truss warned Mr. Lavrov that any Russian attack on Ukraine would have massive consequences. She urged Moscow to pull its troops back to their bases. But Mr. Lavrov said the demand was inappropriate, pointing to British and NATO troop buildups in Eastern Europe. Russia and Belarus have begun 10 days of joint military drills amid a diplomatic push to avert war in Ukraine. Inflation in the U.S. soared last month to the highest rate in 4 decades, reinforcing the Federal Reserve's decision to begin raising interest rates. The U.S. Labor Department says consumer prices jumped 7.5% in January from a year earlier. This is the steepest year-over-year increase since February 1982. Shortages of supplies and workers, heavy doses of federal aid, ultra-low interest rates, and robust consumer spending combined to send inflation accelerating in the past year. Turning to Africa now, where the World Health Organization's Africa Director, Matshidiso Moeti, says Africa is moving to the control phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, and increased vaccination rates will be crucial in helping the continent live with the disease. Dr. Moeti said although COVID-19 will be with Africans for the long run, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Speaking to the press in an online briefing, she said COVID-19 has caused the deaths of more than 242,000 Africans, and it inflicted tremendous damage to the economies of the continent's 54 countries. To the southeast of Asia now, where the Philippines has lifted a nearly 2-year ban on foreign travelers. Fully vaccinated travelers who tested negative for the virus will also no longer be required to quarantine upon arrival. The Philippines imposed one of the world's longest lockdowns and strictest police-enforced quarantine restrictions. This to quell a pandemic that caused its worst economic recession since the 1940s. New Zealand is facing an Ottawa-inspired protest against coronavirus mandates, as police have arrested dozens of protesters camping on the grounds of New Zealand's parliament. About 120 had been arrested by Thursday evening, many charged with trespassing or obstruction as the protest enters its 3rd day. New Zealand was spared the worst of the pandemic after it closed its borders and implemented strict lockdowns. But some have grown wary of vaccine requirements for certain workers and mask mandates. All right, well, meanwhile, President Emmanuel Macron says France plans to build 6 new nuclear reactors and to extend the life of existing nuclear plants. The plans are part of the country's strategy to reduce the GHG emissions that cause global warming. Mr. Macron said on Thursday that the construction work is to start around 2028, so the first new reactor can be launched by 2035. The move comes amid concerns about spikes in energy prices and France's dependence on global gas and oil producers. Activists denounce the initiative as an environmental threat. Mexico's president is also making moves in the energy sector. He is vowing to press ahead with changes to the electrical power industry. This despite U.S. concerns that they could close off markets, choke competition, and possibly violate the USMCA Free Trade Pact. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador said Thursday the proposed changes don't affect the treaty at all. But he acknowledged foreign companies have been complaining that the change in rules would affect investor confidence in Mexico. U.S. climate envoy John Kerry raised significant concerns over Mexico's plan to favor its state-owned electricity company and limit private and foreign firms that have invested in renewable power. The American Heart Association says evidence suggests marijuana use can cause cognitive dysfunction. That includes deficits in attention, verbal and nonverbal learning, short-term and working memory, visual and auditory processing, problem solving, processing speed, and motor functioning. Its first scientific assessment on marijuana use also finds the periods of time before and right after birth and during adolescence may be windows of vulnerability. A wild crocodile with a used motorcycle tire stuck around its neck for 6 years has finally been freed by an Indonesian bird catcher. Wildlife conservation officials hailed the tireless effort as a milestone on Wednesday. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.